Genesis. Introduction. Genesis, or Bereshit in Hebrew, means the origin of everything. For Jews, Genesis is the first of the 5 books of the Torah, or the Pentateuch in Greek, that open the Hebrew Bible. It not only relates the origin of humankind, but also how the Jews' ancestors, the Israelites, were chosen by God to be monotheists. For Christians, the origin story of Genesis is the first in a pair of bookends, the second of these being Revelation, the last book of the Bible, which describes the apocalypse. Themes and authors. The book of Genesis divides into 2 sections, the first concerning the primeval period and the second historical or patriarchal period, although some scholars view the story of Joseph as the 3rd section. The primeval period is concerned with creation, disobedience, the fall, Cain and Abel, uncreation, and punishment, the flood, Tower of Babel, and recreation. In the patriarchal period, God chooses 2 descendants of Noah, Abraham and Sarah, to travel to the promised land to be fruitful and multiply. The narratives then follow the exploits of their offspring, especially of Abraham's grandson Jacob, whose sons found the 12 tribes of Israel. In their final story, Jacob's son Joseph brings the family to Egypt, preparing the ground for the transition to the book of Exodus. According to Jewish and Christian traditions, Moses, inspired by God, penned the entire Torah, including his death in Deuteronomy, a belief still held by traditionalists. However, in the authorship, in 1878, the German biblical scholar Julius Wellhausen published his theory that the Torah was written by 4 authors, whom he labeled J, E, P, and D. J for Yahwist, who used the name Yahweh for God, E for the author who used Elohim, P for the priestly class who wrote about genealogies and rituals and created the structure for the narratives J and E, and D for the author of Deuteronomy. Many scholars see repetitions and contradictions in Genesis as a sign of this composite authorship. Genesis chapters 1 and 2, for example, tell different creation stories, with God creating humans at separate points in the narrative. Abraham tells 2 different kings that Sarah is his sister, not his wife, Genesis chapters 12 and 20. And Jacob is renamed Israel twice, Genesis chapters 32 and 35. The acceptance of these multiple truths is a fundamental aspect of Rabbinic Judaism. For Christian traditionalists, however, there can be no contradictions. Genesis chapter 2 is a further explanation of chapter 1, Genesis chapter 12 and 20, 2 separate stories, and Jacob's name is only officially changed in Genesis chapter 35 after his covenant with God. Political purpose. Wellhausen and other scholars also believe the identity of the Genesis authors could be contextualized from theological and political implications present in the text. One theory dates the authors to the reigns of David and Solomon, circa 900 before the current era, with the J author compiling stories from Judah and the E author compiling stories from the northern tribes, creating political narratives to unite the divided Israelites. Schools of interpretation. In the 60s, scholars led by Robert Alter turned to literary criticism to unlock Genesis, examining its final form in Hebrew. They looked at literary devices such as wordplay, often lost in translation, and repetition, and the different genres, which might indicate the merging of multiple texts. In the latter half of the 20th century, scholars shifted criticism from the text itself to the personal agendas of its interpreters and claimed there was no right way to read the Bible. Most interesting to non-scholarly readers of the Bible, perhaps, is the tension between Genesis and science. Traditions of Gilgamesh, the Babylonian creation story, in 1872 revealed a flood story similar to the biblical one. For some, this confirmed that Genesis was accurate, but for others, it indicated the influence of Babylonian mythology. This tradition came only 13 years after Darwin published his theory of evolution and the origin of species, published in 1859. In 1925, the Scopes trial to determine whether Darwin or Genesis should be taught in Tennessee schools pushed the issue to the top of U.S. politics. Debate continues in America today as a new wave of creationist museums seek to demonstrate that science and Genesis are not necessarily incompatible.